caught in the crossfire. It's caught in the crossfire.
In the latest installment of the Militarization of the Police series, we discussed the police state. Now, before you fall in line with anyone trying to get you to believe that we live in a police state already, keep in mind that we can tell the difference between our police and our military, unlike in other authoritarian countries like China, North Korea, and Cuba. George Orwell's book 1984 was published and later made and remade into a couple of movies. It gave readers and viewers an inside look into the life in the ultimate police state, as well as many ways the society's power brokers used media and military campaigns as well as other methods to control the population. However, the surveillance state of our world is becoming as intense as theirs in the book and the movies, with programs like the one by the NSA, CIA, using smart and cloud devices in American citizens' homes to spy and survey us, violating our Fourth Amendment rights. Okay, we want to ask ourselves, what is the police state? We can go by what people in the media are telling us, or we can go by the research. Basically, the one thing you have to realize and remember is that policing will always be in an evolutionary process. You will not have law enforcement be the same as it was 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even 25 years ago. It is always an evolving process because the dangers are always changing. But you have to make sure that it doesn't evolve to a point where it becomes a police state or one of perpetual martial law. Okay, let's look at the definition of police state. A police state is a political unit characterized by repressive governmental control of political, economic, and social life, usually by an arbitrary exercise of power by police, and especially secret police, in place of regular operational, administrative, and judicial organs of the government according to publicly known legal procedures. The inhabitants of a police state may experience restrictions on their mobility or their freedoms to express or communicate political or other views, which are subject to police monitoring or enforcement. Political control may be exerted by means of secret police force that operates outside the boundaries normally imposed by a constitutional state. Now, during the Jim Crow civil rights era, blacks lived under a police state. I know this can be argued, but talking to those who actually lived through it, it sounds like it basically was a police state. It wasn't a sound to it, it was a police state. The same thing can be said of the Jews during the Nazi era in Germany, with the Gestapo, and to fast forward in the more modern age, we have seen where the NSA and the CIA have also been conducting ultra secret surveillance on American citizens. So saying that we're living in a police state, no, not quite, but we're getting close to it. Now, historically, law enforcement and military kind of go hand in hand. In fact, as far back as the Romans, you could actually see where their prefects would be both the firemen and the law enforcement for the empire. And while the job of a protector have gone separately between a fire department and police officers, military inclusion or tactics and training have been pretty much synonymous with law enforcement. So it's more paramilitary trained. Why? Because law enforcement is dealing with in some cases conditions that would normally be seen in a war zone in a civil setting. So to say that law enforcement shouldn't be militarized is actually kind of laughable, because they're trained very similarly. A lot of the equipment that they use starts out from the military. Prior to the gangster era in America, the U.S. police officer would not have military style weapons. That was until the criminals actually had better weapons than the police. So the FBI knew in order to catch people like Bonnie and Clyde, Babyface Nelson, Machine Gun Kelly, Al Capone, they would have to step up their game, especially in training, tactics, and weaponry. So that's where law enforcement catching up with the criminal element comes into play. And they always, at this point, that's when U.S. police figured they needed to be one step ahead, and that's where this comes into play. Now, there is a fine line between law enforcement and becoming a police state, and I'll say more and more, yes, they're becoming militarized, especially from what I've seen from when I was in the department to now. You are seeing a more enhanced military-esque presence. Now, I wouldn't say we live in a police state just yet, because of the simple fact that you do not see cops in riot gear 24/7, and you don't see them rolling around in armored cars all the time. So I would say no, we're not entirely in a police state. Are we heading that way? Very possibly. Police officers in some areas are becoming more like, and as much as I hate to say this, they're becoming more predatory, because if you look at the stealth techniques they're using with the unmarked vehicles, especially those are sports cars, Mustangs, Chargers, Challengers, so on and so forth, you can definitely see it. In the summer of 16, I had the pleasure of being in Cleveland for the Republican National Convention. People have often asked me what it was like, and I'll say this: it is the closest to a police state that I would ever want to come. You had everything from rooftop snipers to military trained jump out boys to barricades and barricaded restricted lanes for VIP vehicles only, and numerous helicopters overhead. Basically, they pulled out everything and the kitchen sink. What you'll be seeing here pretty soon are actual photos that I took while I was just actually driving around, so you get an idea of what it was like. And that brings us to the end of our episode of Militarization of the Police Part 3, the Police State. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and staying with us. And I also like to welcome and thank our new subscribers that have subscribed to the channel. Encourage everyone to keep watching and see the new content that we're coming out with here in the next several weeks. Please, as always, like, comment, subscribe, share, and leave any comments, questions, so on and so forth in the bottom, and I'll try to get back and answer them as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, you now have the survivor's edge. Prepare yourself. It's never a question of if, it's a question of when.